There is no more divisive word in our society today than abortion. Already, I've immediately made a number of you uncomfortable. You might be thinking, is she going to be political? Is this going to be a pro-life talk or pro-choice? Well, I'm going to put your mind at ease and let you know it is neither. And now some of you might be thinking, but what else is there? You're either pro-choice or pro-life. There are no other options, right? Well, that's the problem. And that's why I'm here today. But first, let me rewind and tell you how I got here. I was raised in an evangelical household and have been attending church my entire life. I wasn't really raised to be political in Australia, where I grew up, but when I moved to the United States in 2008 to further my television career, I joined a large conservative church in Los Angeles and quickly learned that politics was an important part of the evangelical world here. I didn't really hold any strong opinions on such a big topic like abortion, but if you had asked me then how I identified, I would have said pro-life. At that point, I had never met or spoken to anyone who had had an abortion. I didn't know any of the data or the research, and frankly, I wasn't interested. You see, it was easy for me to be distant enough from the topic, but hold fast to my views nevertheless. I ended up leaving that church after going through a divorce at the age of 29, and over the following years, my views on certain social issues started to change, and I would express these views publicly and online. The turning point for me on the topic of abortion came when I started to receive private messages on social media from church friends who I remained close with, telling me that they had had an abortion. Now, these were women who were very vocally pro-life, some of whom had even protested outside clinics, but those clinics were the first place they went to when they needed to get an abortion. One woman, who has given me permission to share her story, told me that when she was faced with an unplanned pregnancy, her first decision was to get an abortion, knowing that God would forgive her and she could move on with her life. I started to ask myself, why were these women going to the clinics they so strongly disagreed with? Was there more to their story than what the pro-life label with which they identified was offering them? And why did they feel comfortable talking to me only after I'd left the church? For most of my life, I thought I was pretty set in all my opinions, but learning about the women from my former church, I guess you could say it drew back the curtain for me a little and caused me to start asking more questions. So I decided to go on a journey and figure out once and for all what I thought about abortion. I started looking at the data and the research. I learned about the history of how abortion became such a lightning rod of an issue in modern American culture. I read about the impact of abortion policies here in the United States and around the world. But most importantly, I read and listened to people's individual stories, all of which were nuanced and complex. These were stories from women, but also men, transgender, and non-binary people. And these stories had the biggest impact on me. I've also spoken to many pro-choice women, some of whom have told me that they felt they also needed to be secretive about aspects of their abortion experience. One woman who has now written a book about her life told me she actually felt sad about her abortion, even though she knew it was the right decision, but felt she couldn't tell anyone that. It was becoming clear to me that there were women in both camps whose lives and experiences didn't neatly fit into any political or ideological category. You see, abortion doesn't happen in isolation. People don't just wake up one day, casually or out of the blue, just decide to get one. There are many factors that go into this decision. When I learned that 1 in 4 women in America will have an abortion before the age of 45, according to the Guttmacher Institute, and that the majority of women who get abortions in America are already mothers, roughly 60%, it completely changed the way I thought about abortion and the people who choose it. A study from Lifeway Research, a Christian resource, found that more than 4 in 10 women were churchgoers at the time they decided to end a pregnancy. In an article, they state, many women go silently from the church pew to the abortion clinic, convinced the church would rather gossip than help. Since 1990, data has also shown us that abortion rates have actually been in decline. But I wonder why there isn't more emphasis on the reasons for this decline in our policies and conversations. I have a feeling that once we start to do that, the binary pro-choice, pro-life labels will start to become more and more obsolete. So why am I doing all this research? Well, I personally have not had an abortion, but I have become very passionate about this topic after learning about the women from my former church, and now I want to use my personal background and professional experience to make a difference in the hearts and minds of other people. As a journalist and content creator, I'm taking my 16-year television career, both in front of and behind the camera, working for networks like MTV, MSN, Disney, Nickelodeon, Fox, and ABC. And I'm developing a documentary series that seeks to forge new ground on this issue. But I'm not just looking at abortion. In fact, that is merely the jumping off point into deeper dialogue. The series is my attempt to find common ground and widen the scope of the way we think about reproductive, sexual, and maternal health. Through a series of compelling personal stories showing just how complex abortion decisions are, we're also joining the dots with social issues like sex education, birth control, paid leave, foster care, maternal mortality, incarcerated pregnant women, teen mothers, poverty, race, and more. We're bringing together experts and change makers and having honest, compassionate, and contentious conversations face to face. The 2 big questions I'm asking in this series are, whose life are we really saving, and at what cost? Because if we're only looking at abortion and completely ignoring all the other interconnected social issues, what are we saying about who we value? And are we telling women it is better to live in silence than be supported? Now, I'm fully aware that what I'm trying to do with this series may make some people angry or confused. But when I launched a crowdfunding campaign in early 2018 on Seed and Spark to raise money for the pilot episode of this series, not only did I end up raising more money than I had initially asked for, but I received so many messages from people of various faith backgrounds and political leanings telling me they were excited about this series and ready for a new conversation. In August of 2017, I became a mother for the first time, and it opened my eyes as to how far we still have to go as a nation to truly be the leader on placing value on families, women, and children. Looking at our lack of family-driven policies and support programs compared to other developed nations brought this into a sharp and sobering view for me as a new mum. Let's look at the issue of maternal mortality for a moment. Approximately 700 women will die in America each year from birth-related complications. That is the highest rate in the developed world. For African American women, the rates of death are 3 to 4 times higher than white women. The current numbers that we're seeing are equal to the numbers we saw in the late 1800s, a time when women, while preparing for marriage, would sew their own burial shrouds along with their wedding dresses because the inevitability that they would die from childbirth was so high. That is how far backward we have gone. But how is this happening today in the most powerful nation on earth, which spends more than any other country on healthcare? Why isn't there more of a national outcry about this, equal to what we see with other important issues? And is it possible to harness the passion and energy of advocates from both sides of the abortion debate to take on this issue together? Because the solutions do exist. But as long as we continue to only focus on abortion, other important reproductive health issues like maternal mortality, will keep getting ignored. Creating common ground starts with each one of us being willing to find it. My goal for this documentary series is to see a complete cultural shift in the way we think about and discuss abortion. And I hope to potentially lead the way on what it looks like to go beyond the binary pro-choice, pro-life labels and find common ground even with those we disagree with. Let's do away with this notion that abortion is a single issue we vote on. Instead, what if it was thought of as a medical and a social issue, like it used to be decades ago? What if we lived in a world where people felt confident sharing their abortion stories, knowing it would lead to positive and productive outcomes in policy, as opposed to shame and judgment? To achieve that, we need to dismantle the old way of doing things and rebuild with something new. Because at the end of the day, women, especially low-income women and women of color, are bearing the ultimate cost of our divisiveness. The current status quo reinforces enemy lines and tribal boundaries and a narrow binary that does not fully nor accurately represent the full spectrum of human life as it relates to reproductive issues. Simply put, it's not working. We've reached a tipping point, and it's time for change. To end, I want to leave you with a few questions to think about. What does it mean to value life? Whose life are you willing to champion, and at what cost? There is a quote that best sums up this ambitious but determined focus I have with my documentary series. It's an excerpt from a Rumi poem titled A Great Wagon. It says, "Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there." I hope what I've shared today will encourage and challenge you to go deeper and ask more questions, as I did. If we're willing to do the work, have the deeper and often difficult conversations about abortion, and go beyond our limits and labels, I believe we can completely revolutionize and reframe reproductive rights for the better. Thank you.